They weren't given enough rifles, so they turned their shovels into blades. In World War II, some of the most dangerous weapons never came from a factory. They came from desperation and the minds of soldiers who knew they couldn't wait for supplies to survive. With enemy lines closing in, with bunkers collapsing and cities on fire, they reached for what was already in their hands: cans, soap, wires, boots, oil, cloth and bone. From those scraps they made weapons, not gadgets, not gear, but tools of resistance. Some were banned after the war. Others were hidden, buried in silence, shared only in whispers from one fighter to the next. They weren't trained for this. They were forced into it. Because when everything broke and nothing came to help, survival meant turning the ordinary into the unthinkable. Today we uncover 10 unusual weapon hacks World War II soldiers made from everyday items, and why these methods still matter for anyone interested in survival, history and resilience. The sharpened shovel turned a tool into silence. In the frozen trenches of the Eastern Front, the enemy wasn't always far away. Sometimes they were close enough to hear breathing. Soviet soldiers learned quickly that when rifles jammed in the cold or ammunition ran dry, the one thing that never failed was their entrenching shovel. Issued as standard digging tools, these short-handled spades were sharpened along the edges with rocks or scrap metal until they could slice through wood, ice or bone. They became brutal close-quarters weapons, quiet and devastating. A rifle fired gave away your position. A shovel strike left no sound, only one man standing and one gone. German soldiers soon adopted the same method, with some spades even manufactured with factory-sharpened edges disguised as tools. What made this weapon legendary was not just its lethality, but its silence. Molotov's fire made bottles deadlier than bullets. In 1939, as Soviet tanks pushed into Finland, the defenders had no anti-tank rockets, they had glass bottles. Filled with gasoline, stuffed with cloth and set alight, these makeshift bombs ignited engines and forced tank crews to abandon their vehicles. Named with bitter irony after Soviet Minister Vyacheslav Molotov, the Molotov cocktail became a weapon of the desperate. Resistance fighters across Europe copied the design, filling bottles with kerosene, tar or even alcohol when gasoline was scarce. Some wicks were made to ignite on impact using phosphorus or potassium mixtures. From rooftops to forests, a simple bottle of fire could stop convoys, blind tank crews and light up ambushes. It wasn't just about destruction but accessibility. Anyone with a bottle and fuel could wield one. Sardine can trip mines bought time from nothing. In the hills of Italy and Eastern Europe, resistance fighters built tripwire alarms from sardine cans, wire and scraps of gunpowder. A flattened tin was rigged with nails, springs or match-head powder, then tied to a wire across a path. A tug on the wire snapped the pin and sparked the charge inside. These traps weren't built to kill, but to delay, confuse and warn. The loud crack of metal and flame was enough to scatter a patrol or signal that the enemy was approaching. In darkness, 10 seconds of confusion was the difference between escape and capture. It turned food waste into survival. The pen guns smuggled freedom in pockets. Inside prison camps and occupied cities, resistance fighters created weapons that looked like writing tools. Pen guns were simple tubes of metal loaded with a single round and fired by a spring-loaded pin. They could be hidden in a sleeve or a coat pocket, passed through searches and used at close range to take down a guard or seize a real rifle. These crude but effective pistols were built from plumbing pipes, stolen springs and nails. They gave the powerless a fighting chance. Even after the war, their design influenced intelligence agencies who saw the value of a weapon that didn't look like one. The bread bomb turned food into sabotage. In occupied Poland and Greece, bread wasn't always food. Sometimes it was a weapon. Resistance fighters hollowed out loaves and packed them with gunpowder, nails and screws. To the eye, it looked like rations. To the touch, it was heavy, but few suspected the truth until it exploded. Bread bombs were slipped into delivery baskets, cafe trays, or left on supply wagons. Housewives helped prepare them, priests hid them in church deliveries, children ran them across town. When they detonated, the destruction was immense, but the message was greater. Even the most ordinary daily item could strike fear into an occupying force. The booby-trap piano used beauty as bait. In France, resistance fighters learned that soldiers were often, careless, with abandoned homes. A piano sitting untouched was just so tempting, and German officers simply couldn't resist pressing a key. That curiosity, well, it became their downfall. Explosives hidden inside were rigged to keys or hammers so that one note triggered a blast. These weren't massive bombs, but in small rooms they were absolutely lethal. Radios, photographs, and even music boxes were also wired with explosives. The point wasn't only to kill, but to remind the occupiers that nothing was safe, not even music or art. Graveyard caches made the dead allies. Across Eastern Europe, fighters buried weapons, food and radios in cemeteries. Patrols rarely searched graves, assuming the dead posed no threat. But under tombstones and inside crypts, caches of guns, bread and letters to London lay hidden. Families guarded the secrets, children were taught silent codes, scratched into stone, and gravekeepers, well, they turned a blind eye. Entire supply chains lived beneath sacred ground. In some towns, German officers built barracks beside cemeteries, never realizing their enemy's lifeline lay just a few feet away. This wasn't just survival. It was genius born from desperation. Burned maps kept secrets in memory. Couriers carrying intelligence risked everything if caught with a paper map. Resistance fighters solved this by memorizing routes, then burning the maps before departure. Some encoded paths into rhymes and songs, turning directions into memory games. Others marked the way with faint scents of herbs like garlic or thyme tied to doors and trees, fading quickly but lasting just long enough to guide. If captured, couriers carried no proof. Just ashes in their pockets and memory in their heads. Their greatest weapon wasn't paper or compass, but the human mind. Razor boots made every step lethal. When knives weren't available, resistance fighters turned to their shoes. Razor blades or shards of glass were embedded in boot soles, fixed with nails or wire, and blackened with soot to avoid detection. A stomp or a swift kick could disable an enemy instantly. These boots passed checkpoints unnoticed and gave fighters a silent advantage in alleys, basements, or crowded streets. Their simplicity made them deadly, and their subtlety made them terrifying. Soap grenades turned rations into explosives. When grenades were scarce, resistance fighters sometimes carved out bars of soap, hollowing them to pack in powder and fuse cords. Covered back over with a thin soap layer, they looked ordinary enough to pass inspections. Carried in hygiene kits, they could be slipped past guards or patrols without suspicion. Thrown into vehicles, bunkers or supply sheds, they caused blasts strong enough to wound, disable or destroy. The soap grenade symbolized the ingenuity of fighters who refused to surrender, showing that even a ration meant for washing could be turned into a weapon of resistance. These 10 hacks weren't clever tricks made for attention. They were desperate measures born from starvation, fear and survival. They remind us that in World War II, war wasn't fought only with tanks and planes. It was fought with sharpened shovels, hidden radios, hollowed bread and soap packed with powder. Each method was a lesson in adaptation, a reminder that when everything is stripped away, survival rests on what you can create from what you already hold. We live in comfort today, but comfort is fragile. The lights, the food, the water, none of it is guaranteed. What remains constant is ingenuity, resilience, and the ability to adapt as those before us once did. Keep these lessons alive. Share them, study them, and remember that history's forgotten skills may one day be the difference between survival and collapse. If you value keeping history alive and learning from the resilience of the past, don't forget to subscribe to In the Beginning and share this video with others who care about survival knowledge. Together, we can make sure these lessons are never forgotten.